Hey folks, how you doing? Just a quick update for you about what's happening in the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Coming live from Israel here on this Friday, January 30th, 2026. So, currently, as you know, or you probably know, there is a ceasefire in place since early October of 2025, and that ceasefire has been violated a number of times. Pretty much all except one of those violations happened by the Hamas, which started the violations. Literally, the day the ceasefire was signed, within 2 hours of it, the Hamas attacked Israeli soldiers and killed two of them with an RPG. And so began the process of counterattacks and then re implementing the ceasefire until the next violation. And one time, Israel struck first, and there wasn't really no retaliation because it was just a one off strike against the leader of the Hamas military wings uh, supply and planning guy. He was basically the guy, commanding the Hamas on being a disciplined fighting force. And they took him out about a month ago. Hamas didn't really do anything about that because what can they really do? Yes, of course, they could do the usual type of thing they try to do, which is shoot at Israeli soldiers violating the ceasefire, which just would have led to more reprisals. So, but since then, Hamas has violated the ceasefire a number of times again, to which Israel has responded again, and then re-implemented the ceasefire. So there's this tit for tat, exactly as I've been telling you would happen from the day that the ceasefire Trump proposal was even suggested. Before even the draft came out of the initially 21 point plan, then it was reduced to a 20-point plan. And we're now at a standoff, basically, between the Hamas and Israel. Hamas has supporters like Turkey and Qatar and Iran and other, when I say Iran, I mean the dictatorship of Iran. They have supporters. The leaders of those states support Hamas financially and logistically and in other ways. And they want the Hamas to stay in power because, them staying in power is a continual threat to Israel and destabilizes the region, which they want also, and keeps them more in power and more relevant as time goes by. Because if the Hamas ceases to be relevant, well, they all lose that chip on their deck. Now, it doesn't mean they lose all their chips, but they lose that particular one, and it's a particularly big one for them. If Hamas is no longer a power in the region, Turkey will have to, reallocate its priorities and its assets, and they will probably start funding more groups similar to the group that took over Syria, right? Al-Jilani's group, HFT. And that obviously became the Ministry of Defense of Syria, as they call it, which has recently taken over the Kurdish area, controlled by the SDF, which has now been basically dissolved. And yes, there are still pockets of resistance fighting the MOD, but basically they have been subsumed by the Ministry of Defense. They have a ceasefire agreement. The Kurds in Syria got sold down the river by Trump because he's more focused on what's happening with Iran and the Greenland issue with Russia and China. So Turkey will reallocate its priorities of funding the Syrian MOD more, trying to establish stronger relationships and more leverage over Syria. Now that Assad's government is gone since a year, and this Al-Jilani / Al-Shara guy, is still running the show in Syria, and is likely to continue doing so, at least for the time being. So they have a new dictator there to be friends with and have better relations with, since literally it's thanks to Turkey that guy was able to take power. Ultimately. So there is a lot at play here. And Qatar, of course, wants to continue funding Hamas because they use that as a huge distraction for the Qatari people to not say, hey, wait a minute, what about our own internal failures with our king leading our country and all the not great things he's doing? And of course, they use Al Jazeera as a propaganda device to do that distraction, right? And basically misinform and mislead people in Qatar and other people around the world who obviously watch Al Jazeera and support Qatar against Israel. Um, it's a very hairy situation, a very nuanced situation between all the different nations involved. And right now, with everything happening with Iran, those countries backing Hamas and trying to get a foot in the door, notably Qatar and Turkey, trying to get their foot in the door, not only in the International Stabilization Force operating in Kiryat Gat, where they have a couple of officers, but actually they want to put boots on the ground in Gaza, which goes against the IDF's plans to disarm Hamas, because of course we don't trust Qatar or Turkey to actually do anything to that end, right? We don't trust that the group that's been literally housing the political executives of Hamas and providing the money and sustenance and logistics, moral support, political support, arms, money, the whole deal. We don't believe that they're going to do anything to disarm that very group, right, which they endorse, and which President Erdogan of Turkey has called, a freedom fighter organization. And they have a just cause and all this crap that he says. And the same thing goes for the King of Qatar. He's not going to want to see that group disarmed, even though they all signed on the dotted line that that's what would happen. And remember, Turkey and Qatar were supposedly instrumental in getting Hamas to sign the dotted line along with them, because they knew at the time that Trump was quite mad about what was happening and wanted a ceasefire. And he, used political pressure to make sure that they signed. And the Hamas acquiesced to the requests of their landlords in Qatar and Turkey and said, okay, fine, we'll sign on the dotted line. But as soon as they signed, they said, we have no intent of implementing this. So they signed in bad faith. I mean, this was obvious. Yeah, I said that they would do that. They signed in bad faith, and they've done everything they can to throw a wrench in the wheel so that the peace plan could not move forward. And that's why all we've seen from the peace plan take place is the exchange of hostages for prisoners. And eventually Israel got the last hostage back home, Ron Gvili, whose body they found after searching a mass grave of some 250 Palestinians in Gaza, which must have been quite an awful thing to do, but they did. And that means that really logistically, there is no more pressure from Hamas against Israel in terms of leverage that Hamas holds over Israel, because there are no more, for the first time since 2014, there are no more Israeli hostages, dead or alive, being held in Gaza, not just by Hamas, but by any group. So what is likely to happen next is that, by the way, if you're here, thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much. And if you like the information I'm telling you, please like and subscribe. Thank you. If you want to know what's going to happen next, you need to look at what's happening in the relationships between these countries I've been mentioning and talking about, Turkey, Qatar, and also the dictatorship in Iran, as long as it's still in power, which hopefully will end soon, but for now they remain in power. And despite the fact that the Iranian rial has fallen significantly in value, you have to remember the Iranian dictatorship holds a lot of dollars. Yes, even in places where they can access it. They also hold a lot of Bitcoin, even in places where they can access it. So not all their funds are frozen. They have many billions of dollars squirreled away in foreign accounts, which they can use to keep paying for these terrorist groups to keep doing their thing. Remember, it doesn't take that much money to fund a terror organization. $1 billion goes a long way to fund a terrorist organization. And that's exactly what they're counting on. They're maximizing their effectiveness for their payment services, right? They're basically counting on the money that they pay to have an effective impact. So they're going to keep paying the money, even at the expense of their own people, not having significant funds not having enough money to buy food, not having enough money to pay for rent or utilities or anything else. They don't care about their own people, as is evidenced by the fact that they're slaughtering them by the tens of thousands, apparently every week. Right? We know that more people, at this point, it was pretty much confirmed, yeah, by many sources, credible sources from inside Iran. And even, by the way, from external sources, including Time Magazine, that we're talking somewhere like at least 80,000 to 100,000 people at this point have been slaughtered by the regime. Right? The dictatorship in Iran is no laughing matter, and they have killed probably six figures of people in the last few weeks, which means that they have killed in 1 month far more people, yeah, innocent people, like several times more innocent people, at least maybe 2 or 3 times as many people, innocent people, as Israel did from the beginning of the war after October 7th, 2023, when Israel began to respond, which actually really took a couple of weeks. I mean, not including the obvious immediate kinetic action that Israel had to take to stop the thousands of terrorists that were, that invaded Israel, and of which there were about 1,000 after most of them ran back into Gaza on that morning or early that afternoon. By evening, most of them had returned, but there still remained about 1,000 Hamas and other terrorists in Israel, and it took about 3 days to make sure that they were all dead or captured. And again, about 1,000 of them were killed and captured in those 3 days inside of Israel. But and then it took a couple more weeks. Hey, Shabbat Shalom. It took a couple more weeks before Israel actually began its kinetic offensive. Hello there, I see you. Hi there. And yeah, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. Appreciate it very much. So it took a couple of weeks for Israel to actually take significant kinetic action once they started, to invade Gaza to get rid of Hamas and rescue the hostages. And that was essentially since that time until, well, now even, or you could say October, when the ceasefire was signed. Some 70,000 or so Gazans, including about 25 to 30,000 Hamas terrorists, have been wiped out. By the way, the IDF has just confirmed its own report that their estimates are that around 70,000 people have been killed in Gaza, including terrorists and non-combatants, which means that the kill ratio, again, of non-combatants to combatants is, for such a protracted war in such an urban environment, historically low. There is no comparison. Even the 12-day war with Iran, which did see, some civilians obviously die, but saw very little die by comparison to the amount of IRGC people and scientists, etc., top targets. That had in theory, even lower non-combatant to combatant death ratio, but that was only a 12-day war. We're talking here about a war that's lasted more than 2 years, 2 years and 4 months, and it still is ongoing technically, even though there's a ceasefire. It's not an end of the war. And in that time, we've seen about 35,000 innocent people, 40,000, maybe 45,000 people, innocent people die, anywhere from 30 to 45,000. And in the last couple of weeks, we've seen, probably more than 100,000 people slaughtered in Iran by the dictatorship. So that's kind of the status of where things are at. And what we can expect to see next is either the Hamas will disarm of its own free will, or they will be disarmed by force. And the question is how much force and who will lead that force. It will probably be Israel, because of course. And what comes next after that, we will have to wait and see. But we are far from saying there's peace in Gaza with Israel. Anyway, I wish you guys all the best. And until the next one, peace. Shalom.